Okay, thank you, and welcome to Birmingham Schools Forum on Thursday, the 19th of January 2023. If I can, welcome everybody to today's meeting. Mandy, could you just let us know the apologies that you've received, please?
Yes, Chair. So we've received apologies from Lisa Fraser, David Woolledge, Anna Consimetti, Paul Crossley, Rebecca Hemsley will be attending on Paul's behalf, Heather Wheeler-Jones, Lana Forrester, Colin Townsend, and Les Lawrence.
Okay, thank you, Mandeep. And if I can then go to the minutes. I'm going to go through the minutes if that's okay to start off with for accuracy. If anybody would like to identify anything that they do not believe is a true reflection of the previous meeting held on the 15th of December, please can you let me know? So that's page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, and page 7. David.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, everybody. In relation to item 8, page 6, delegation, we had a conversation regarding why and how information about delegation decisions was sent out apparently to all, if not most, of Birmingham schools. And part of the action there was to find out why that had happened, how that had happened. The point I'm making here is that there was a comment, I'm not sure who made it, about an analysis out of the consultation process, the delegation. That is well established already. It's well known, I think, to most people here, although anybody new will need to be appraised of that. And I won't go into the process here about consultation. All I'll say is that it is for representatives of relevant sectors, if I can use that phrase, Chair, to feed back to the people that they represent, their constituents, to discuss that. And those people that are charged with that in relation to delegation are the people here who are representing maintained school groups, whether that's secondary or primary. That's a short summary. I hope that's helpful, because we do understand, I think, the process. It is a simple process. It may look a bit complicated if you're a first timer. I think the issue that we had is why this was sent out to all schools, because that isn't, of course, the correct approach to take. Although we don't want to hide anything, and there's an argument for good transparency. So I don't know if there's a response, Chair. I know you might want to come on to this when we're going through action points, but I don't know if there's a response as to why that email was sent out last time, because I'm sure that will have confused some head teachers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. Kate, would you like to respond?
Yeah, should we pick up that point immediately, if that's okay, with Chair? Yep. I raised this issue, as you know, because of there only being one response. I have had a conversation with the Chair this morning, and he has appraised me, David, precisely of the mechanism that you have outlined in terms of how delegation should work. So we're all on that right page. Why that happened, I do not know. I was not covering this area at that time, so all I can do is apologise to you and to all our schools, and indeed to the members of Schools Forum, that sensible approach that you've got and that you all know was not adhered to in this particular case. So my apologies for that.
That's fine.
David, if I can propose that, and I think we still need to vote on these 3 areas of delegation at the end of this meeting, whether it's any other business or whether it is an extraordinary item, that we do vote on these 3 areas so that we agree the delegation and that we can complete the authority pro forma toolkit. if everybody is in agreement with that, if I can leave that to the end of the meeting once we've gone through the agenda, I think that will be able to resolve this issue if everybody's in agreement.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Kate. Okay, if I can then go through the actions, I'll pick out any actions that I think we need to pick up in this meeting. If anybody's got anything that they feel that they would like to address, if you could please raise your hand on Teams, that would be great. Thank you. If I can just say action 5.5, I believe Helen isn't on the call yet, but I think the issue was not about historic information. It was making sure that we've got the information regarding the high needs block budget in a timely fashion so that we can we are consulted on it. I think previously it has been brought to forum retrospectively. And I think that was the point that I was getting at. But I think a conversation with Helen will enable that to be presented in a timely fashion at the next schools forum meeting. Okay, Rebecca, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was in relation to the action regarding the Oracle update. That's what I'm going to provide. So I'm very happy to do that at the start of the session and then leave, which would be appropriate to do so.
Yeah. Would you like to do that now, Rebecca?
If that works for you.
I think that, yeah.
Okay. So it's just a quick update in relation to where we are. So we have held a discovery workshop that was held just before Christmas, of which there were some items that came out of those good discussions with the business support managers. There are 21 in total, and out of those 21, some are already known, so these are additional, which is very positive. So the update is that we our IT&D departments are working on that. We are providing an update to the business forum next Tuesday because we have a further follow-up discovery workshop of where we've got really good engagement with some of our business managers, where we're providing them with an update on progress and timelines, which they can then bring out to the schools and to provide them that assurance. Secondly, we're holding a wider business manager forum on the 31st of January. And I think we have about 94 of your colleagues who are attending, which is going to be a really good update on how we are moving forward for schools with Oracle. And Paul and Heather will be able to sort of, from a local perspective, sort of bring that to life a little bit and within the schools. So that was basically just my update, Chair.
Thank you, Rebecca. And that does, to my mind, covers off the next three actions. Is there anybody who would like to make a comment on this? I'm David.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a brief comment. Thanks for the update. Does that now mean that Oracle is functioning as it should? Thank you.
Thank you. No, it's in transition, and part of identifying what we need to move forward quickly was part of that workshop. So it is improving, but it's not at where we need it to be at the moment.
Chair, can I ask when we might know when it will be fully operational? Because I don't need to labour the point, but this is causing head teachers great concern. It has done for many months. We've raised this, colleagues have raised this in the summer term. And it is just, the progress does appear, this isn't a criticism, just a comment, the progress appears to be very, very slow.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And I understand that, and it's about providing you with those timelines. That's part of what Tuesday is about. So, but I will take that back to the finance colleagues and IT&D to provide further assurance. So I'll take that back.
Thank you, Rebecca. Denise.
Thank you.
Sorry, just one more.
Okay.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just to follow up to that, the rec files are now coming down, but we're discovering errors in those. That's causing further problems. We're coming to end of year, and it sort of ties into David's point. We're coming to end of year. How can we complete end of year reporting and also setting new budgets? We haven't had appropriate reporting throughout the whole of the financial year due to Oracle. How will this be addressed? And when we're paying for services that can't be fulfilled, how is that also going to be addressed?
Yeah, and I will take that back to Sarah Pitt, who's the financial director, who can talk to that. But I think in terms of the timeframes. And so the rec file's a good example. We did lots of testing and we know that it's not working as it should. So we're working very closely with the schools. In terms of the budget and access to that and reporting, that is a critical priority, which we know, and we are reaffirming those timeframes. But I will get Sarah to either provide a written update, or she can come back to another meeting to provide that assurance.
Thank you, Rebecca. Claire?
Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Rebecca. And just to say, Sarah is looking at the charges as well, Denise, as well as where we can potentially, put in some additional capacity where we've got people who we could potentially ask to work, who are part-time, to work additional hours, etc., to support schools where we need to. So yes, I'll ask. I also will ask Sarah to provide a written update. There'll also be a communication coming out in terms of some changes in terms of some compliance work and deadlines and things to schools in the next day or two that Sarah has approved. So look out for that email when that comes through. Thanks,
Thank
Chair.
you, Claire. Thank you, Rebecca. I do. Yeah, I do. I think we do struggle with this at Schools Forum. I don't think it is necessarily Schools Forum direct business, but I know indirectly this does have it's had a demonstrable impact on the way that schools manage their budgets and their understanding of their finances. So I think it is important that we get this right. And I'm just wondering, Kate, Rebecca, is there a way of resolving this so it isn't so that we can just create a short update at Schools Forum and it isn't the place that this is being discussed? Is there a solution in place?
Yeah, I think it was more to the point that Paul wasn't here to give, because I think he may attend these, but also there was an action, so I didn't want there to be a void. And that was the purpose for me to join. But I recognise and respect everything that has been said.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you to everybody who's commented. Claire?
Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Just one final point. I don't think Rebecca mentioned this, so just to pick up, there is a meeting for all business managers, I believe, on the 31st of January. And Rebecca and Sarah will both be present at that meeting. So that is probably the most appropriate forum to take things forward with the business managers individually, and then to report back with a short update again to the next Schools Forum. But as Rebecca said, in terms of the actions for Paul last time, thought it was important that we do cover those off by inviting a rep along. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, by saying that, I didn't intend to discourage members from raising the issue of Oracle. I know how important this is. I think we are all just after a solution as quickly as possible here.
Yeah. Thank you for your time, Chair.
Thank you, Rebecca. Okay, the 6.7, if I can carry on with the minutes, 6.7, the DLP funding to be part of the SEND report has been carried forward. I don't think we have that again. I think the understanding of the impact of DLP and what that looks like moving forward, hopefully will be, if we can carry that forward again, we'll be able to address that in the March meeting. Okay. Kate, I believe that the induction has taken place for...
Indeed, it did.
members.
Just to update the forum, we had a meeting last week, although there were only a handful of people there, we had a very, very interesting couple of hours running through what the Schools Forum is and what it does. I took away 9 areas to investigate, and I will be writing those up and coming back to a future forum on my response to those. But what we did determine, and this is for forum to know and to get your approval to forum, is that we thought we would have a once a year induction stroke workshop available for people, so that actually even those who wanted to refresh their understanding and knowledge, particularly because sometimes, as we know, the legislation changes, that we set a date at the end of each academic year in the summer term, and we just say that's the date at which we're going to do it, so that newbies can come before they start in September, if that's when they start, but that we actually fix that date and we run that on an annual basis. Of course, elected members are welcome to join us on that as well if they choose so to do. So We thought that would be a good way forward, so we're doing that. And as I say, there's 9 particular tasks that I've got that I'm going to take away, and I will come back to our next meeting on those as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Appreciated. Denise?
Yeah, just to say thank you to Kate, because I did attend that and it was very useful. Kate, is it possible to send out the slides from that meeting?
Yes, of course, very happy to do so. I'll send them to Mandeep to send round the forum members. We'll do that.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so the work programme to be added as a permanent item to the agenda, and that was with regards to the early years maintained schools technical group to discuss the options relating to the funding shortfall before the next school forum. I don't think that has happened. Is that correct? But we do have the early years paper, which will pick that up.
There's that, but also I think in terms of planning the work of the forum, you and I have started discussions on that, James, with Terry, but we're not there yet. But we will. No, we know it is something we need to do and make sure it's mapped out across the year, so we know which meetings are going to discuss what.
So that is in progress, and we have the update from the early years. Thank you, Kate. The meeting papers were sent out a week in advance. Thank you. That was really appreciated and really helpful for everybody. So I've had a number of comments back to say how much that is appreciated. Yep. And as you've identified, Kate, we have met to discuss the issues regarding the Central Schools budget and the strategic approach to the management of reserves. I don't think we've necessarily reached a solution with regards to that, but that those discussions have begun.
That work is ongoing, and I don't like the term ongoing, but in this case, I'm going to use it.
Jill?
Just to say, on page 4, we moved from using initials to identify people to people's names, so that needs picking up at some point.
Yes, my apologies for that. We did ask that everybody was listed in terms of their title of the position that they were, so that if, for example, you were to have another director of lifelong learning and employability, that person would take on board the work that has already started, rather than people going, well, it was Kate and now it's somebody else, so actually it's not Kate, then somebody else doesn't have to do it. You know the point that I'm making here. So I don't know why that finished halfway through, but it should not have done so.
Thank you.
Thanks for picking it up.
Thank you. Yeah, Mandeep, just before we finalise the minutes and publish them, can we just make sure that we are using initials of people's names and that we are referring to their job title, so it is clear about where the any actions where the responsibility falls? Thank you. Catherine?
It was just going back to the reserve discussion, and I know you and Kate have started that, but a number of the papers today require decision and propose the use of reserves. And I find it very difficult to not have some transparency about the overall financial position, underspends. I mean, technically, if we're funding things from reserves, you could argue that they're being funded non-recurrently, and that at some point there could be a great big gaping hole. And so you could argue that, you know, should we be making commitments today against using reserves when we don't know what the reserves are, the recurrent position and the future commitments. So I know we said that you and James would discuss it, but as a forum member, I feel that we should all have more transparent information about them, and because otherwise we're making decisions in ignorance.
Yeah, I think the idea is that Kate and I would discuss it so we could share the information. Terry, do you want to?
Yeah,
just a comment there.
Yeah, I'll add something to that if that's okay, Chair. So we are talking about dedicated schools grant return reserves. So DSG reserves, we're not supposed to retain them. So any DSG allocation that's
provided to Birmingham Council for the year is expected by the Education and Skills Funding Agency to be used within that year. Now, there will be reasons why the reserves have been built up, but we're not expected to have a reserve plan on DSG, a reserves policy. On general funds, yeah, we are, but we're talking about dedicated schools grant. So the reserves potentially will run out over the coming years, because obviously it is recurrent costs, as you pointed out, Bert. We are expected to have a zero balance at the end of each year or thereabouts on the DSG. So we haven't got enough funding for the schools block in 23-24, and we're required due to pupil numbers increase. Sorry, not pupil numbers, pupil factors increasing, and also requirements around the growth fund. So we do need to use some of those 9.2 million reserves that we've got in the schools block for DSG, and similarly for CSSB, for the Central Schools and Services block. We need to use some of those reserves to fund ongoing commitments, which was part of the previous education skills grant. So we are expected to use those reserves. We're not expected, because the SFA can actually claw those back. They don't generally do, but they can do.
Yeah, I understand if we're going to lose them, we should spend them, but we aren't giving. We're in danger of funding recurrent expenditure non-recurrently, and then we're going to end up with we're subsidising basically, you know, recurrent budgets. I suppose I'm just saying, what does the next 5 years look like? I don't want to be presiding in a schools forum that suddenly has a massive financial problem because of decisions that we've made on a very short-term, non-recurrent basis.
I think it's a decision we're going to have to take nationally with other local authorities, because other local authorities are the majority of them have also got a deficit for 23-24 in the schools block. So it is something that we're going to have to kind of collectively present to the government, that we haven't got enough funding to finance our schools and pupils.
Okay, if I'm going to take Mike's point, Mike.
Yeah, I just wanted to add my support of what's just been said. To be able to make informed decisions without being able to see the future is really not okay for us as a forum. So really, I'm just echoing what's just been said. I know we've got to make some decisions today, but it really, I accept there might need to be a national piece of work done on this, but I fail to see how that stops Birmingham from doing it in the meantime.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I can, I think this may come up again, so I'm conscious of this. I think there appears to be a lack of transparency over what the reserves are and how they are being allocated, and the rationale for their allocation in this year, and what the impact will be on subsequent years. And I think that is going to prove difficult to make some of the decisions that we may have coming up. My suggestion is that we press pause on this conversation and we'll look at the individual reserve items, the individual items where we are using reserves, if everybody is okay with that. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we do have the SEND map, thank you. Terry, did you have feedback as to why when we're looking at the benchmarking, Birmingham seems to be £50 per pupil over the average?
In 21-22 and in years prior to that, there was an extra 10 million provided to Birmingham Council to cover the children's services. If you just bear with me, what's to fund?
Yeah. Was it the equal pay
Equal
claims dating
pay.
back to
It was,
2010?
yeah, the equal pay,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
And
Thank you.
that's that. Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Okay, and we'll pick up the delegation later on. And I think we can for this time next year, hopefully we'll have a paper in place which is detailing the process for understanding the delegation, so we can codify that. We've had feedback on the discovery workshop, so if everybody's in agreement, I can yeah, I think we agree these are an accurate reflection, and we agree the minutes if we can just amend the initials throughout the paper so they are consistent. Okay. Thank you, everybody. If I can then go back to the agenda. Kate, I can hand over to you for the LA update.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've got a couple of points that I'm going to run through for folks, and then, of course, you're very welcome to ask me any questions you would like to. So this is a wide-ranging, I suppose, local authority update. And I know Councillor McCarthy is with us, and she may feel there are things she wants to add to my little list. But I'll start with the Warm Welcome Initiative. Schools will know that the council committed to supporting citizens with the cost of living crisis. They may not know that I have responsibility for libraries, so I'm always very happy to talk about our libraries because they are based in our communities, and I'm sure many of your school communities access our community libraries. But just to give you some data around that, since the 5th of December, over 20,000 people have benefited from a warm welcome visit across our community libraries and the Library of Birmingham. I think that's absolutely outstanding. I'm very, very pleased with that. I think it's a real shame we have to have 20,000 people doing that, but actually those numbers are quite significant. So please encourage your families who may be feeling the brunt of the cost of living crisis. There is a warm welcome for them in their community library, and they're very welcome to turn up. You get a cup of tea, often a scarf and some gloves, a nice biscuit, and a very, very warm welcome, as I say. So that's my first item. School organisation we had at the last schools forum, but just to let you know, that paperwork is doing its rounds in terms of cabinet, and the expansions and the adjustment to admission numbers will be going ahead. There will be a whole range of activities during February half term, the Holidays Activities Fund, funded through the Holiday Activities Fund, and we'll be sending information out to schools about that shortly. Helen Ellis, if she joins us, wouldn't let me go unless I told you that actually the inclusion strategy is well on the way to being framed and finalised, so that's very exciting. And my colleagues in my part of the wood, employability and skills, wouldn't be very happy with me unless I reminded you that the 6th to the 10th of February is National Apprenticeship Week, and there's a whole range of activities across the city being run by the Careers Service. But in particular, I will draw your attention to the fact that on the 8th of February, the Ladder Academy is opening its doors. It's launching a new facility at Mill Street in Aston, and schools are very welcome to visit, and bring your young people there to visit and find out everything that you need to know around apprenticeships during that week. So that's the 6th to 10th of February. So I think that's my list from my side. Councillor McCarthy, is there anything you feel I should draw forum's attention to?
I think you've covered everything, Kate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. So very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Is there are there any questions for Kate or Councillor McCarthy? No. Okay. Helen Ellis, the Director of SEND and Inclusion, has asked if she can join the meeting later because of a prior commitment. So she said that she'll hopefully be joining us at 3:30. So I'm going to suggest that we leave the SEND update till then. And that means that we can move to the dedicated schools grant settlement 23-24. And Terry, am I passing over to you there?
Please, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Members of the forum will have received the Dedicated Schools Grant Settlement Report for 23-24, which was sent out a week ago. So the purpose of this report is to inform Schools Forum of the Dedicated Schools Grant Settlement for 23-24. So just for a bit of background, so schools receive funding via a variety of different funding streams. The main ones being the 4 blocks of the Dedicated Schools Grant, otherwise known as DSG, pupil premium, education and schools funding, agency post-16 funding, and universal infant free school meals. So the DSG, which is the main grant that funds schools and education, comprises of 4 blocks, which is the schools block, and that's to fund primary and secondary mainstream schools. The Central Schools and Services block, otherwise known as CSSB, and that's to fund local authority functions supporting schools and education. The iNeeds block, and that's to fund specialist schools and resource bases within mainstream schools. And the early years block, which is to fund nurseries and early years providers. So the Dedicated Schools Grant allocation for 23-24 for Birmingham is 1,457.6 million. I'm not used to talking in figures so large, to be honest, but Birmingham is the biggest authority in Europe. So the SFA currently recoups an amount for the DSG allocation to directly passport to academies and free schools, and the council is then responsible for the remaining budget. But the DSG grant was allocated on the was published on the 16th of December, but academies recoupment within the schools block is not published until the revised DSG allocation in March. So a breakdown of the DSG allocation for 23-24 is shown in a table on page 2 of the report, which shows also the DSG allocation for 22-23, which was updated at November 22. So the schools block has increased in 23-24 by 54 million. The Central Schools and Services block, that's reduced by 57,000, and the reason for that is historic commitments within the Central Schools Services block reduces at 20% per annum. So we've had it's a 2.43% increase in ongoing responsibilities, but a 20% reduction in historic commitments, which has resulted in a £57,000 reduction. The iNeeds block, there's an additional 27.6 million provided to Birmingham Council when comparing to 22-23, but the iNeeds block is increasing nationally. The demand for iNeeds places increasing nationally at around 12% for each local authority. And the early years block, there's a 5.7 million increase in the early years block, but that is only a provisional, it's an indicative figure, so that is likely to change. We've included, for comparison purposes, we've included the Academy's recoupment at 22-23, at the 22-23 amount. It won't be that, 'cause, there's obviously been more conversions within the year. But as I say, for comparison purposes, we've put that in, and also the iNeeds recoupment. So overall, we're looking at an 87.6 million increase in the DSG funding. I've just realised that I'm not actually sharing my screens while I'm scrolling down the report, so I'll just share my screen with you. So the table. So the funding for the year is the 1.457 million compared to 22-23, and overall that's an 87.6 million increase for Birmingham City Council. There's also an additional DSG grant allocation for the schools block which is an indicative figure at the moment. So Birmingham Council has provisionally been awarded an additional 37.6 million for 23-24, and this is to further support schools with the costs of inflation and wider costs. So school level allocations for that additional funding will be confirmed in spring 2023. So the schools block allocation, I have to, my team is required to complete an authority pro forma tool, which is a mandatory tool which has to be completed to allocate the schools block funding to all schools using current pupil numbers, de-delegation factors, growth funding requirements, and also the national funding formula. So the authority pro forma tool is now done, and that feeds into the next report that I'll be presenting. So schools, following the ratification of the APT at today's forum meeting, the ESFA then checks the pro forma to ensure that it's compliant with the national regulations. And following ESFA approval, the council will need to issue budgets to its maintained primary and secondary schools by the it's the mandatory national deadline of the 28th of February. And the ESFA will also use the pro forma to calculate the academy budgets to feed into the general annual grant statements, or the GAG statements that the academies receive from the ESFA. I've just mentioned that the minimum funding guarantee, local authorities are allowed to set that percentage between 0% and 0.5%, as this forms part of the national funding formula. I'll cover that in more depth in the next report that I present. De-delegation has been included in the APT, but it still needs approving at this forum meeting. So the de-delegation amount doesn't affect the overall schools block requirement figure, but it will affect the individual schools budgets. So whatever is agreed, we can the kind of deficit in the school block budget that I refer to in the next report will not be affected by that. But I'll go into more detail in that when I present the next report. Split sites, those will be increased by 1.9 in line with general national funding formula factoring increases. And the PFI top-ups, the national the RPI X factor for as of November 22 was 13.5%. Now this is a substantial increase on previous years where it's been factored in at like between 3 and 4%. So that has added obviously to the cost of the schools block requirement. The Central Schools and Services block, I'm presenting a paper on this later in the forum. So just as an overview, it was established by the DFE in 2018-19 to fund local authorities with statutory duties around maintained schools and academy. It's funding for ongoing responsibilities such as admissions, servicing of schools for education, welfare and other factors. Funding previously allocated through the retained duties element of the Education Services Grant. So that's the one that's in that's part of the ongoing responsibilities as well, and residual agreed funding for historic commitments, which is reducing at 20% per annum. So the indicative 23-24 allocation for the CSSB is 8.245 million. It's not estimated, that's the actual allocation that's in there. So this is, as mentioned before, this is a reduction of 57,000 or 0.057 million when comparing to 22-23. So the reduction, as I've previously mentioned, is due to Birmingham Council losing 20% of its funding for historical commitments, which all local authorities do, and gaining 4.5%. I think that's 4.23%. I'll go into more detail in that in the paper that I present later in the meeting. So the INES block. I mentioned earlier that the demand for INES places is increasing at around 12% per year nationally. So at the end of 21-22, the cumulative INES deficit. So within those reserves in DSG, we have got a deficit in there, and that relates to the INES block. So it is a cumulative surplus reserve, which does include a deficit within it. So it was 4.1 with the final repayment to clear plan to be made in 22-23. Obviously, we're still in that financial year, so that will be part of the financial year. And the government has announced substantial increases in INES, for which Birmingham will receive 237.6 million after direct academy recoupment. And it's an overall increase of 27.4 million when comparing to 22-23. There's an additional allocation within the DSG for INES block, but unlike the schools block, that's already included in the 27.4 million increase and is not indicative. That's the actual figure. So details of proposed the INES budget will be shared with schools forum subgroups prior to the main March 2023 forum meeting. So we've got till the end of March, although we'll have it prepared long before then, to inform providers of their INES budgets. So that's mainstream schools with resource bases and specialist provisions. The early years block, so the indicative DSG settlement for the early years block in 23-24 is 92.5 million. That's an increase of 5.7 million when comparing to 22-23. The council is required to pass through a minimum of 95% of the annual allocation to early years providers, and is allowed to retain a maximum of 5% of the annual allocation to support central functions. Now, later in the forum meeting, Lindsay Trivett will be presenting a paper on the options around that. So the early years budgets will be determined and communicated to provided in full by the mandatory deadline of the end of February. So if I can, so has anyone got any questions around the dedicated schools grant settlement?
Can I just confirm, Terry, that there is no decision to be made at this point regarding those, and you will go through those papers separately, and that is when we will need to make a decision?
That's right, yes. So this is for approval. This is actually the allocation that's come from the SFA. So there's nothing as such to decide on this. This is the allocation of the 4 blocks.
Okay, if everybody's in agreement, I suggest that we approve that and then move to the decisions that need to be made. Yeah. Okay, thank you, Terry.
Thanks, Chair. If I can go on to item 7 on the agenda, which is the DSG schools block budget and APT. This report is for decision, and the purpose of the report is to seek schools forum approval for the allocation of the national funding formula factor values and the minimum funding guarantee at either 0% or 0.5% as part of the mainstream schools funding formula for the council, and to agree the preferred option of utilising a proportion of the DSG balance, brought forward balance of 9.2 million to offset the shortfall in the DSG block funding for 23-24, and also to agree the de-delegation factors that were discussed at the October schools forum meeting. and were consulted with schools at the end of November via a communication that was sent out.
Terry, are you able to share the report, agenda item 7, please?
Oh yeah, sorry. Agenda item 7, yeah. So. Sorry, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Can members see the report?
We can see it, yeah, thank you.
Okay. I'm conscious that it's quite a lengthy report. So if to summarise, the report refers to the Growth and Fall in Roles Fund, but there are separate agenda items after this paper on those which Jaswinder and Lucy will be presenting. So if I can just summarise, so the delegation amounts that are being included in the APT, these still need to be agreed by forum. So we've got three areas which are contingencies for primary and secondaries, and the amounts that were put forward in the October paper were £15.23 per pupil for both primary and secondaries. The facilities time staff cover for primary was £4.32 a pupil. The facilities time for secondary staff cover is £3.55 per pupil, and the behaviour support services for primary pupils is £4.79. Now, I've included those in the APT based on the October paper, but I'm conscious that those still need to be agreed by forum. So, upon completing the APT, the APT is the authority pro forma tool, so that's the spreadsheet that the authority is required to complete to determine what the funding is for the schools block and its schools, and whether it's affordable. So, without using the option of trimming the national funding formula pupil-led factors in the APT, there are two options available to the council, and one of them is to use the maximum allowable minimum funding guarantee factor of 0.5%, and the other is to use the minimum allowable minimum funding guarantee factor of 0%. Both options result in a deficit, a shortfall for 23-24. So if we use 0.5% with no capping and scaling, this results in a total cost of 1,081.4 million and a resulting shortfall in funding for 23-24 of 3.1 million against the ESFA allocation of 1,078.3 million. So this shortfall, although it sounds substantial, is only 0.29% of the total DSG schools block allocation for 23-24. And if the council applies the MFG factor of 0% with no capping and scaling, then this would result in a shortfall of 2 million against the ESFA allocation. So this shortfall would equate to 0.18%. So both way less than 1% of the total DSG schools block allocation for 23-24. So the shortfall in funding is mainly due to the increase in pupil-led factors in 23-24. The shortfall percentage of 0.29%, which is the 0.5% minimum funding guarantee scenario, is comparable to many other local authorities for 23-24. So the recommendation is that we use the schools block DSG brought forward balance as at 31st of March 22 of 9.2 million. We use a proportion of that to fund either option 1, which is 0.5% minimum funding guarantee, or option 2, which is 0% minimum funding guarantee. As the DSG is provided to be utilised in year in full in the year that it is allocated. The SFA does not intend for reserve DSG balances to be retained. So the recommendation is to apply the 0.5 minimum funding guarantee factor to provide schools with additional funding protection and to utilise 3.1 million of the 9.2 million DSG schools block balance to offset the shortfall. And as no shortfall on the schools block DSG has been projected for 22-23, this would leave a projected schools block DSG carry forward balance of 6.2 million at 31st of March next year, which is 2024. Can I ask forum members, first of all, there are a number of options to consider. So the first one is dedelegation. As I've mentioned, I've used the rates that were put forward to forum members in the October forum paper. The second one is using the MFG of 0.5%, and the third one is to use reserves to offset the shortfall of 3.1 million.
Okay, Terry, I think my understanding is that we would need to vote on this, and I think this does raise the issue of that we have previously discussed, where we are talking about the use of reserves, and although the ESFA are saying that we need to use the reserves in year, we're carrying forward nearly twice as much of the reserves that we're using, and I think this is where that transparency and understanding of what this means long term really does come into play here. And I think that the question is for school forum members, if we, my suggestion is, Terry, that we put forward first the proposal of the recommendation of 0.5%, because that is my understanding, that's the recommendation that you've made.
Yeah, that's right, Chair, that's right.
And I think before we go to that vote, I just wonder if anybody wishes to comment on this point. Do we feel comfortable voting on this with the lack of transparency around the reserves? Does I propose that we do go to a vote unless other people feel differently about that? Steve.
Thanks, James. I'm just going to what 2 points really. I'm often reminded of what some of my rather wise governors say to me regularly, and have done through my headship, which is the money's meant for the kids now, not at some point in the future, which is one point I would make. And the second point, and we know we've got schools struggling, and etc. And the second point that I would make is that this doesn't feel sustainable. And so are we putting schools in a position that their budget will have to change next year, or some other unspecified point in the future, because we haven't got a sustainable funding source for the decisions we're making today? And that feels wrong to me. I don't know if I've got a vote on this, I have no idea, but I mean, I certainly couldn't vote for it given the information we've got currently.
Thank you, Steve. Does anybody else have a comment, either with regards to Terry or to Steve's comments? Catherine?
Well, it just goes to what I said earlier when we picked this up under the matters arising, that I do, whilst I want to get money into schools and as a chair of governors, we're struggling. As an experienced chief exec in the past, committing money when I've no view about sustainability doesn't sit well with my financial training, basically.
Thank you. Kate, Terry, do you have a response to that, or the other options? I do take this to a vote, and if members choose not to agree to this, then yes, I think we'll have to see what we do then.
Yeah. So shall I chip in and then Terry? I think all those points are pertinent and well made. I think the point about spending the money on the kids is really, really absolutely fundamental. But I also take on board, like your good selves, the fact that it sits a bit uncomfortably to spend reserves on recurrent expenditure. I think the difficulty we've got is, in some ways, and Terry will be able to correct me if I'm wrong, we don't quite know what's going to be recurrent because we don't know what our budgets are going to be. That doesn't rest, of course, with Birmingham City Council. It does rest with central government. And I think that's the point you're making, Terry, about lobbying central government to say, don't put us and therefore our schools in this sort of position, because actually I think we'd all prefer to spend any reserves on one-off stuff that we knew didn't have a long tail to it. And we're all a bit worried this might have a bit of a tail to it. But then I think our job is to go back to DFE and say, look, we had to do this because actually you hadn't firmed up your spending plans. So
Yeah.
I hope that
So-
helps people in terms of the decisions that they may need to make, James.
Thank you.
Yeah, can I just say, Chair, that we do intend to do some further work to determine how those reserves have arisen. However, the 9.2% is still less than 1% of Birmingham's DSG overall. So it is material.
9.2 million.
Yeah, the 9.2 million. So
Yep.
the 3.1 million that we're proposing to use is 0.29%. Of the DSG allocation for 23-24. So if you compare the 9.2 million, that's around 1% of the total DSG. So it's, although it is material, when comparing with other local authorities which have got substantial INES block overspends, for instance, 1% is not deemed to be a kind of a substantial percentage when talking about kind of shortfalls or surpluses. But when we do that further work to determine how that 9.2 million is being built up, we can then make more informed decisions on how to use those within year and further allocate to providers. But using the 3.1 million, if we lobbied the DFE on 23-24 because we've got an in-year shortfall, their response would be, well, you've got some reserves there, so why don't you use them? And probably next year as well, and probably in 2024-25. But obviously there is a structural deficit there, or appears to be appearing, which does need a kind of a national response.
And we can only pay the maximum we can allocate is the 0.5% MFG. Yeah, we can't actually give any more than that. Okay, thank you. Kate?
Yes, I just wanted to come back because I do feel the feeling of the room, because it does, as I say, it sits uncomfortably with me that actually, you know, you would spend your reserves on recurrent expenditure. So what I'm going to take, if it's okay with you, James, as an action from this meeting is that I will speak to the DFE, who, as I understand it, have not come back to us from the meeting that they were at in December to say how they felt that meeting had gone. And I will take on board talking to them about the need for stability in the system in order that actually we do not have to do these sorts of things. If that's okay with people, I will do that on the forum's behalf. Very happy to do so, because I need to contact that advisor and find out why we haven't had a report back, which I need to bring to the next meeting. So happy to wrap that up. If that makes people feel more comfortable about making what is a uncomfortable decision, if that's helpful.
Thank you, Kate. Yeah, and if we can record that as an action, that will be great. My feeling is the correspondence from the DFE did say that they were observers only and wouldn't be providing feedback. So that feedback may not be forthcoming, but I think it is important that we challenge the uncertainty that we have here. David?
Sure, I was just going to ask what challenge, if any, has already been put into the DFE about this. I support Kate's proposal, absolutely. I think the underlying problem has been created by lack of funding, DFE difficulties, and that needs to be challenged and challenged in a very firm way. Terry's right, and thank you, Terry, for the very clear analysis of the situation. I think that was helpful. We've been here many times when analysis hasn't been that helpful. It's to confuse rather than to clarify. So thank you. But Terry, you're right. Certainly in our view, that if any forum goes back to the DFE and complains about lack of funding, which is absolutely the case across the country, they will come back and say, but you've got reserves. Why are you asking us for more money? So let's get that sorted out. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. Steve.
Thanks again, James. And listen, I'm not trying to set myself up as a voice of opposition here, but and Kate and Terry, I appreciate what you said. Kate, I appreciate your offer of an action. I think fundamentally the point remains is that we from my I get it. I get that 9.2 million when you're talking on macro Birmingham level is a tiny amount of money. I get that you're working on spreadsheets that run into billions. I understand that, but 9.2 million will be significantly more than almost every single school budget in this city. So it's not like there's a comparison there, and we can't just say, oh, that's all right. Love to know how the underspend built up. That would be a great question to be answered. It always feels like, and Terry, you're relatively new to this, so there's no blame attached here, but it always feels like there's just a bit more work to be done before we get a full picture, and there's just a bit more information that we need. And so I always feel like we're making decisions in a deficit position here, rather than running in a deficit position. I still don't feel confident that I could understand fully that we're agreeing a budget that doesn't feel sustainable, no matter how many years it might be sustainable on the current, the current structure. So again, I'm surprised that a balanced budget hasn't been offered as an option, and because you seem to have, offered the 0.5 or the 0. That I'm surprised a balanced budget hasn't been offered as an option that is within that. Anyway, obviously you'll go to a vote and there'll be a majority or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Sean.
Yeah, just it was really helpful to get the kind of the scale of the figures you're talking there in the grand scheme of the DSG. Can I ask, in terms of this financial year, are we forecasting a meeting budget, underspend, overspend of the budget? Just again to put into context what you're proposing for next year.
What for next year, 23-24, is that?
No, for obviously you're wanting a decision on the next year, but in terms of this year, with two and a bit months to go, what's the budget looking like?
Yeah, we're projecting to budget on the schools block for 22-23.
So no underspend there on budget.
No underspend. So basically, what we've informed schools we will pay them. We'll journal those across at the year end. So it was affordable in 22-23, but we're in a situation where that's not the case for 23-24.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Sean. Catherine.
I mean, the pragmatic side of me hears that we could lose reserves if we don't spend them, and secondly, if we go to ministers or whoever for more help, they'll say use your reserves. So I'm kind of thinking, well, a bit of rock and a hard place, really. But I guess I'd feel happier if, I don't know whether it would be the March meeting, we actually did have an overall financial strategy, or a state of play financially for the next 2 or 3 years. I mean, I have to produce a 3-year forecast for you guys a couple of times a year, showing the impact of falling pupils and so on, and I don't get the same back from you. And I think if there was a plan if it was possible to identify the issues that have been dealt with non-recurrently through reserves, and there was a plan to make them, what's the plan to make them recurrent? Because at some point they're going to have to be made recurrent. And I would feel slightly more comfortable supporting this if I'd got an assurance that we were going to get that sort of report. What does the next 2 to 3 years look like? And I know some of it's going to have to be based on assumptions. But you can do a worst case, best case, likeliest case.
Okay, thank you, and thank you everybody for the feedback there. I think we do, we appreciate the challenging situation that we're in here, in an attempt to be pragmatic and working in a deficit of information that has been identified, and to sort of hopefully address those recurrent issues in the future. I'm going to suggest that we do take this to a vote. Can can I just have clarification about which members do vote for this, for the DSG? I'm just wondering, is Malcolm available? Is Malcolm the best person to ask here?
Yes, I can, Chair. I can advise that the decisions made by the local authority following school forum's recommendation, and all members can vote.
Okay, so that includes early years and special.
Yeah, all members can vote. Yeah.
Okay, so in a moment, I'm going to suggest, if this is okay with everybody, that we will do the hands up. I am going to suggest that we vote on the 0.5 recommendation from the made by the local authority, that we do apply the maximum 0.5% MFG factor to provide schools with additional funding protection, and this is utilising 3.1 million of the 9.2 million. Please could you raise your hands now if you are in agreement with that proposal? Okay. Thank you. If we can just record that 10 members have agreed with that, if you could now lower your hand. What I'm going to ask is if there is anybody who disagrees with that proposal or that recommendation, should I say, if you could raise your hand now. Okay, thank you. So my suggestion is, for the minutes, that recommendation is the decision's been to agree with the local authority's recommendation that the 0.5% minimum funding guarantee. If we can record that 10 members agreed and 2 members disagreed with that. Malcolm, can I just check that is an acceptable way of the decision making process?
Yeah, absolutely, Chairman. The Schools Forum needs to recommend it to the council for approval.
Thank you, and we recommend that for approval. Thank you,
James.
Yeah.
So I wanted to amend what we were voting on, which I think was evident from what I said. I ended up voting for, but if we get a commitment for the report that I asked for to be produced, you know, so I don't want, because the only way that I've been able to counter my sort of prudence by voting for this is what I said. I'd like to see a strategy for the next 3 years that shows how anything that's been funded from reserves is going to be funded in the longer term. And without that commitment, I wouldn't have voted for it.
Okay.
So I think the recommendation just needs to be amended to say, you know, provided that, blah, blah, blah.
Okay. Kate, if you're happy, if we can have
I
that
was just going to
caveat
say,
in
through you,
the
Chair,
minutes.
happy to take that on board as an action. Terry and myself will work on that, and we'll bring that back to Schools Forum, hopefully for March. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Okay, I've got Kate and Terry's hand up.
Can I ask about the de-delegation, Chair?
Okay, I'm going to make a suggestion then, seeing as you've raised it now, that we do look at the de-delegation. So I think it feels the right time to agree that de-delegation. I have brought the paper up from the October meeting to say that there are 3 existing areas on de-delegation, and that is contingencies to fund residual costs arising from the opening and closing of schools, deficits of discontinued schools, schools in financial difficulties, and other expenditure where the circumstances were unforeseen. Facilities time, which I think you can read the text there, and the same for behavioural support services. Now, my understanding that there is, it is different people who vote for this, and I'm going to suggest that we take them one at a time. And so the contingencies to fund residual costs, I'm going to ask Malcolm, can I just confirm, is it everybody voting on every single one of these?
It is only local authority maintained schools members who are allowed to vote. And
Yep.
it's normally wise to ask primary schools to vote separately to secondary schools, so that that gives primary and secondary schools the option of taking a different decision if they so wish.
Okay. Thank you, Matt. I think the behavioural support services is only for primary schools, so I think we will limit that to primary schools at the moment. I think there is no intention for secondary schools to be part of that. Okay, can I just check? Hi, Denise.
Hello, yeah, I'm just going to check on the special school situation as well for those voting.
Malcolm, are you able to answer whether or not special schools vote on this section?
Yes, I am. I'm just pulling up the schools forum guidance so I can read it specifically. It says, maintain primary and secondary school member representatives will decide for their phase. Middle schools are treated according to their deemed status. So there is no provision for special schools to vote.
Thank you.
Because they're part of the high needs budget.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I hope that's clear.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And David?
Sorry, I was just going to make the very same point that has just been made. This doesn't include special school members. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Okay, can I just check that I'm just aware, do we have primary and secondary representatives in this meeting? I think we've got Maxine.
Yes, you have. I'm for primary.
Yeah, is there anybody else from primary? I'm just looking down the list.
Well, I don't know. Do governors get to vote? I'm from a primary school.
I'm from a primary school, Anna Pendleton.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah. Malcolm, do governors vote on this?
Governors can vote if they are a school member. If they are representing the school, then they can vote.
So
Thank
that's
you.
a yes then, right?
Yes,
Yes.
that is a yes. So governors can vote. Okay. This is going to be fun then. So the three the three existing areas. Can I just check that we have secondary representatives?
I don't think you, James, I don't think you have. Mike Dunn was here.
No, I was going to say,
he is the only secondary maintained rep.
And there's no secondary governor present.
Yes, I'm here, Mashuk. I'm representing secondary schools.
That's good.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon. On that, I think you will be representing all secondary schools for this, although I think secondary just to say that the way that the process that we have been through is that both primary and secondary forum have agreed that they would support these. So I'm hoping that that makes this process a little bit easier. Okay. So understand that I am going to ask everybody to vote together. So we with the hands up, we'll be able to tell if there's any discrepancies. Dedelegation areas. If we take the first one regarding contingencies, please could those people that are eligible to vote, please could you raise your hand now if you support the proposal for the contingencies to fund residual costs. Okay, thank you. So that is 6 people who have agreed. If you could put your hand down now, thank you. And in a timely fashion, Mike has just arrived as well. Could you put your, Maxine, yeah, thank you. Could you put your hand up if you disagree with the proposal? Simon, did you put your hand up for agree and disagree? Okay, thank you.
Sorry, James. That was
okay.
A mistake on the disagree.
That's fine, thank you. So that is 6. All 6 members who are eligible to vote agreed, and nobody disagreed. If I can then move to the facilities time, if I can ask the same question, Mike Dunn, just to say that we're voting on the delegation. If you're able to join, that'd be great. If you agree with the proposal for the facility time delegation, if you could put your hand up now. Okay, so that is 6 people agreeing with the delegation for facilities time. Thank you. If you could put your hands down now. And if you could put your hand up if you disagree with the proposal to de-delegate for facilities time funding. Okay, thank you. So that is 6 people agreeing with the facilities time and nobody disagreeing. And then if we can then move to the behavioural support services, and this, my understanding is this is only available for primary school members to vote, and that is because secondary schools have already agreed not to proceed with this. So if you are a primary school maintained representative, if you agree with the proposal for the de-delegation of the behaviour support services, please could you raise your hand? Okay, thank you. If you could now put your hands down. Thank you. If you could now raise your hand if you disagree with the behaviour support. Okay, so that is 0. So in that case, I think as a schools forum, we can agree with the proposed de-delegation areas to be included for the APT for 23-24. Thank you everybody for that. I know that is a bit complex doing this over Teams. I think it actually brings clarity about who's voting for what as well. So thank you, and thank you for Mandeep capturing that in the chat as well as we've gone along. Malcolm, Terry, do we need anything else from that, or can we proceed?
We can proceed. Thanks, James.
Malcolm, yep. Thank you. Yep. Thank you both. Really appreciated. Okay. So if I go back to the agenda, does that mean that we can now move to the Growth Fund and Falling Roles Fund, Terry?
It does, James.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Agenda item 8. If we move to the Growth Fund. Hi, Jaspal.
Hello, how are you? So I'll be presenting the Growth Fund report. Just to point out, to begin with, I will provide an update on our budget we had for this financial year. So I'm just going to share how we've actually spent the funding that the forum agreed for 22-23. So the funding that was agreed in January 22 was 5.717 million, and out of that 3.488 million related to implicit funding, which I believe has been paid out to the schools. And then in year we had the following explicit funding paid out. So we've got a list of the schools. We've got it split as to whether it was growth or falling pupil role funding. And then in addition to that, we had some business cases that were actually approved to receive funding. And with that, we did submit some business cases to the DFE to disapply the criteria. So if the DFE actually approve all of those, we are then hoping to spend £266,000 on that. So that, with the accruals that have to be done for the funding for this year for the 5/10 payments, we are looking at a spend of 5.8 million. However, it was highlighted earlier in the week that 2 of the schools did not actually qualify for the funding. So whereas we've projected an overspend of 110,000, we are now forecasting an overspend of just £10,000. So we are more or less within the budget that the forum agreed last year. Any questions, or can I move on to the reports? Okay. Right, shall I carry on?
Yes, please, Jasper.
Okay. So basically, when we had the forum in December, Jaswinder Didiali actually presented the report on the growth funding and outlined all of the criteria. So I won't go through all of the criteria because it's already been presented at forum. What I do need to highlight is that the funding requirement has slightly reduced to what we were predicting in December. Now, when we brought the report to the forum in December, we did highlight that it was based on estimates and the figures were liable to change. So the figures that we are presenting in this report are better estimates of what we had in the December report. So at this moment, we are forecasting that the funding requirement for the Growth Fund would be 6.359 million. And quickly moving on to the falling pupil roles funding. Again, I'm not going to go through the criteria because this was presented at the December forum. I just quickly need to highlight the 2 options that we are actually asking the forum to make on the falling pupil role fund. So basically, if we go for good or outstanding schools only, and we fund all the schools at the 100% OPU rate, we are asking for 8.49 million. And if we fund at 75%, we are looking at a funding of 600.637 million. If forum decide that we can actually include schools where we can disapply the Ofsted criteria, we are then looking at a funding of 1.527 million at 100% OPU and 1.145 million at 75% OPU rate. So basically the decision for the falling pupil role report is whether the forum want to agree to fund good and outstanding schools only, and then at what rate, or do they want to go for option B? Then again, they need to agree to the rate. Okay. So that's the decision. But what we've actually got is we've got Appendix A, which actually then would highlight all of the funding requirements. Okay, let me just share that. Okay, so this is just an overall table regarding the funding implications. So what we've put in there is the implicit growth, explicit growth, and the projected falling roles fund. What we've actually built into this particular table is based on the assumption if the forum decide to fund schools where we can disapply the Ofsted criteria and fund them at 100% OPU rate. So that's the higher figure that we have built in. We are then projecting a shortfall of 2.14 million, which we are suggesting is funded from the DSG block reserves. So, Chair, those are the decisions that we actually require.
Thank you, Jaspel. Kate?
Yeah, I think that the big strategic issue there, just to, as has been outlined, is this issue about whether we apply it not to good or outstanding schools, because we will need to go through a formal process. So you might want to bear that in mind in terms of the way you might shape your discussions and your decisions around this. Yeah, because in a sense, we can't prejudge that outcome. It might actually be that they say, no, we're not prepared for you to do that. So.
Can I ask for feedback from last year? Because my understanding is this time last year we agreed to request this disapplication. However, I don't think that Forum has been made aware of whether the DFE supported that disapplication or not.
We haven't had a decision yet, so
okay.
the application is still with them. As soon as we get a decision, we'll let Forum know. But as such, none yet. Just for your information, we have requested this application for 8 schools, so funding towards 8 schools. A further funding for 10 schools was allocated already. Those were the good and outstanding schools, but we've got 8 that were less than good that we've asked for support with.
So the less than good schools haven't had the funding. We're sitting with the funding somewhere else, aren't we? So that we could release that if we needed to, or maybe have to reallocate it to the good or outstandings, for example. Yeah. So,
and so just for clarity for Forum, does that mean that the figure that you shared where we I think Jaspal, you said there's only about 10 we're within 10% of the predicted spend for 22-23. Is that including the 8 schools?
It is, yes.
It is.
So that's it.
Okay. And so if the DFE reject that funding will then be shared between the good and outstanding schools proportionately. Okay, thank you. So so the vote itself may be a moot point if the DFE do not agree with it. Okay, I think thank you for the clarification on that. Does anybody else have any questions regarding this paper? Simon?
Yeah, I wasn't on Forum last year. So what is the rationale for excluding the less than good schools, please?
The rationale is that it is a government criteria, it's DFE guidance, and in order to not do that, we have to apply and put a particular case as to why it shouldn't be applied.
And I think if I can pick up, sorry, go on, Simon.
I'm not sure I quite understand that, but the rationale for excluding less than good schools is what explicitly?
It's the DFE's rationale, which is actually we should all our schools should be good or outstanding, and we should not, in a sense, create, I would imagine, loosest term that I can think of is incentives not to be good or outstanding. In fact, we should be creating incentives to be good or outstanding, and funding schools who aren't is not in the interest of children and young people. I'm not saying that's my position. I'm saying I suspect that would be the DFE's position. So we'd have to have a very strong case to argue.
Well, it isn't the case to argue that sometimes the less than good schools are the ones that need the funding most.
It might be, but we have to make that case is what we're saying. And I want Forum to be aware that we have to make the case. We can't presume that they will agree. And as we've seen so far, we've not heard back that they agreed this year's, let alone next year's. So.
And is there a single case for all 8 schools, or is there a case for school by school?
It's a single case for all 8.
Okay, so stacked against them then. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Simon. David?
Just a brief point. I don't want to go into the details, but it seems to me that the DFE's rationale is a political one. It's politically motivated. People might want to take a view of that or not, but it does seem that if we're not supporting those schools that aren't good or outstanding, we're penalising those schools that perhaps need particular support the most. And that would seem to create a never-ending cycle of non-improvement, or at least it makes that improvement much harder. And I don't think we should be party to that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Chris?
Thanks, James. I think the other aspect that just needs to be considered is time frame here. If the Ofsted category is to be utilised as a judgment, as some schools may not have had a Section 5 in 10 to 13 years, and other schools may have had them within 3 months. And if we're looking at budgets across a year or several years, like I say, that needs to be considered really, because unless those schools are assessed on an annual basis, then technically there's a degree of unfairness there.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. Simon, is your hand still up? Is this? Do you wish to make another comment, or is that a?
I'm flabbergasted, James. That's the only comment I'll make.
Okay, flabbergasted hand. Thank you. Okay, Sean.
My only point would be that even if it's the prerogative of the DfE to reject school forum's choice, then it's our prerogative to make that choice in the first place, and it's for them to reject it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And on that, I suggest that we move forward to the decision unless there are any further comments. Okay, that's great. How do we vote on this, Jaspal? Lucy, do we take?
Well, can I just say, James, it would
Yeah.
be really helpful in making a case if you could put to the schools forum and they could vote on their request that we actually apply for disapplication so that it is more than good and outstanding schools. That would be helpful. We could say that was recorded in the minutes and that was the view of the forum. I will not make political positions about anything, so I'm not going to respond to those comments, but I'm just saying schools forum needs to be aware that's what it's doing so that it can help us to do that.
Thank you, Kate. My suggestion is that before we can put that case forward, but I think we would need to understand how people are voting first before we confirm that case. So my suggestion is if we take the growth funding, which I think is going to be a little less contentious, looking for the comments, reflecting on the comments. The growth funding, can we vote on all of the recommendations together, or do we need to vote on them individually?
I think we normally vote on the growth fund. So we're asking for 6.35 million. So do the forum agree with the criteria? Obviously, it's criteria that's laid out by the DfE, and that's the funding that we are asking for.
Okay, thank you. Malcolm, can I just check that it is everybody who would vote for this?
Yes, it is. It is for forum to decide, and there are no voting restrictions.
Thank you. Okay, so in terms of the growth fund, again, I'll ask you to raise your hand if you agree with the local authorities' proposed recommendations and their proposals for the way the funding is allocated with regards to the growth fund. Please, could you raise your hand now if you're in agreement? Okay, so that is 10 that agree with the recommendations. If you could put your hands down now, please. Okay, just waiting on Mike, if you could put your hand down. Thank you. And can I just check, is there anybody who disagrees with the recommendations put forward with regards to the growth funding? If you could raise your hand now, please. Okay, so I think, yeah, we can report that schools forum agree with the recommendations made regarding growth funding. Thank you.
Okay, So with the falling pupil roll, so this is where we would need the decision. So do Forum want to support option A, which is for good and outstanding schools only, or do they want to go with the option B, which includes schools less than good? And then within those decisions, we need to know whether we're going to fund them at 100% OPU rate or 75% OPU rate.
Okay, Kate.
Yes, if I may, I think the first decision is the strategic one about whether they want it to be for good or outstanding schools only, and if not, they are requesting that the authority applies for disapplication so that this can apply more widely, and then we take the issues about the actual funding rates. It's that way round.
Yeah,
I think.
That sounds great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. And again, my understanding is that everybody is eligible to vote here. So I'm going to suggest that we do two stages of the vote. First one will be option A, that is only good or outstanding schools will be eligible for the Falling Pupil Fund. And then I will ask you to vote for option B, which is that all schools, including schools that are less than good. And I think we have raised the case already. The point has been made that if schools that are not yet good are not eligible for this fund, they are going to struggle to improve the outcomes for the pupils in their schools, because the equity that we as a schools forum would like to see is not being applied to those schools for the many reasons that they may not yet be good and they are being put at a disadvantage. Okay. So if I can say, if you could put your hand up for option A, if you the decision for good or outstanding schools only would receive the Falling Pupil Fund. If you could put your hands up now. Okay, I'm going to report that nobody agrees that it should be restricted to only good or outstanding schools. For option B, if you could put your hand up now, that the Falling Pupil Fund should include schools that are less than good. Okay, thank you very much. And so that is 9 members who have voted that the Falling Pupil Fund should include schools that are less than good. That is a unanimous decision, and that is all members supporting that schools that are less than good should be eligible for the Falling Pupil Funds for the reasons identified, which is that it puts schools that are not yet good at a disadvantage in trying to improve the standards when they need that funding most. Okay, do you need anything further regarding that, Kate, or are you happy with the way that that is being communicated?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. That gives us all we need. So we will need to apply for disapplication, as we've been waiting significantly for this year's. I would advise Schools Forum you maybe weren't waiting quite a long time for the answer for next year's as well. So
fair point.
We will do our utmost to make a very firm case, including putting the views of the forum, taking on board a number of the points that people have made. Obviously, we can't make reference to politics, that would be inappropriate, but we will about the timing of Ofsteds, which I think is a very strong point. So we will do that.
Thank you. And I think the delay in the DFE's decision is not helping as well when those schools do need that funding now. Okay, thank you. And so the second part is the decision to fund the rate at the 100% ORPU, which is choice 1, or 75% ORPU, which is option 2. So if I can now ask you to raise your hands if you believe the Falling Pupil Fund should be funded at 100% ORPU. You could raise your hands now. Okay, and so that is 6 members who have voted for the 100% ORPU. Thank you very much. if you could put your hands down. And then if I can ask you to raise your hand if you believe that the Falling Pupils Fund should be funded at 75% ORPU. Okay, so that is one vote for the 75% ORPU. If all members are agreed, then thank you, Chris. If all members are agreed, if we Schools Forum agree that the Falling Pupil Fund should be funded at the 100% ORPU, and that with the DFE agreement, we believe that it should include schools that are less than good. Thank you, Jaspal. Thank you, Lucy. Do you need anything else from us?
I don't think so. No, thank you, James.
No. Okay.
No, thank you.
Thank you both.
Thanks.
If I can go back to the agenda. I'm conscious of time here. I'm aware that we've got the commission numbers and the SEND report. I'm not sure whether Helen has joined us yet, but my suggestion is if we pick up the hi Helen, sorry, I couldn't see your name on the list. My suggestion is that we go to the early years funding formula and central costs, and then the central school services block budget, and then we come to you, Helen, if that's okay. Thank you. Is Lindsay? Welcome, Lindsay. Hello.
Hello, hello, hello. Am I straight in, am I?
You're straight in. Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so mindful of the time, Chair, everybody's had the paper in advance, have they? So do you want me to go through the main points or just the recommendations and allow people to ask questions?
I think if you go through the main points very succinctly and then the recommendations, that would be great.
Okay. I do have a slideshow. Do you want me to share it or just talk?
Whichever you feel comfortable doing, Lindsay.
I'm happy to just talk. So I'll send you the slide deck for afterwards and you can circulate it with the papers. How's that? Okay, just a reminder that this was agreed previously last year. We agreed the 3-year profile with subject to an annual review once we knew what the every year indicative allocation would be as confirmed by the DFE. So we do an annual review where we look at the principles and substitute in then at a later point the actual numbers, so that it's always done on the kind of like the process rather than the nitty-gritty of the figures, and then we substitute in the figures at the end, which we have done again. So the recommendations that were agreed last time were to maintain the current level of deprivation and free school meal supplements, to increase that there was a priority still given to SEND and a look over the 3 years to increase the IC entitlement, and to try and maximise the base rate that goes out, whilst we then also work up towards the 5% centrally retained in terms of the local authority over the 3 years. So that was what was agreed last time around. So that was our starting point this time. I should also say that the way we work the annual review is that we send out an open invitation to all of the early years and childcare providers that receive funding through the early years DSG. It's an open invitation to come and join us in a co-design, co-production space where we'll go through, we will model the areas that are highlighted to us, and then we'll come to a confirmed approach that everybody signed up to, that we then take forward to Early Years Forum before we bring it here to Schools Forum. So it's a whole process that is wholly inclusive of the sector. So we went to Early Years Forum with the report yesterday, and I should say that they confirmed it, supported it wholeheartedly, and it's no longer a draft. So your version says draft, I will submit the version without draft on it. And there was universal support to that. And I know that there are some members present today on Schools Forum that hopefully will confirm that when I finish my presentation. So basically, what we did, we had a group of around about 15 providers, including PVIs and schools. maintain nursery schools. I would like to say that we didn't have any representation from primary schools, and that is why one of the recommendations is, as it is in connection with the TPPG funding, the Teachers Pay and Pensions Grant, because primary schools will be impacted by that, and we didn't feel it was appropriate to be able to make a recommendation in a tight timescale with no representation from that sector. So one of the recommendations that we're putting forward is that we establish a short-term task and finish group specifically to look at that as a supplement funding. So that's why we've done that. Other areas that we were asked to look at was to give ongoing recognition to the fact that there is increases in the national living wage, cost of living, increasing utility prices, etc. Cost of provision is going up. So it was strongly, again, supported that we maximise the increase in the base rate for all children, that we maintain 100% pass-through for 2-year-olds, that SEND was still a key priority, that deprivation linked to child's home postcode isn't a favoured approach, and therefore to keep that priority on maximising the base rate. But we were asked this time to review the cost of free school meals, because obviously increasing costs of food, the allocation that goes against free school meals hasn't been lifted for a number of years, and we were asked to model an increase on that. So that's the work that we've done. The recommendations is that we again continue the, as agreed last time, we continue the incremental increase of the centrally retained amount. That will go up to 4.75% in the 23-24 financial year, up from 4.5% in the current financial year, and then building up to ideally retain the full 5% by the third year, which is the following financial year, and that is affordable whilst putting in an increase into the base rate. So the second recommendation is to maintain the current level of deprivation supplements, but to increase the free school meal supplement by the consumer price index, which is 10.1%. And because of the additional funding going into the early years DSG this year, it meant that we could increase that base rate, rather increase the supplement with no impact on the increase of the base rate compared to where we forecast it would be this time last year. So there was great support for that. The third recommendation is to, as I said earlier, to establish that task and finish group for the Teachers Pay and Pensions Grant, or the former Teachers Pay and Pensions Grant. And we're really keen to get schools' involvement in that. So if you go to Primary Forum, you know we put that message out earlier this week as well, and we will be actively seeking and targeting if we don't get any self-nominations. The fourth recommendation is to increase the amount allocated to IC. We didn't increase it from the early years block last year, but it was set out in a 3-year profile, and the high needs block did an increase last year that we would like to match this year as set out last year, which will mean an additional £500,000 going into IC from the early years block this year, which would then make the overall IC pot £1 million more than it was a year ago at this point. So much needed funding going into that space. And then the final two recommendations are around having the base rate of funding for 2-year-olds to be 100% pass through. We keep and maintain that, which will make that as a rate of £5.81 for the new year, which is an increase of 20p, and to increase the base rate for 3- and 4-year-olds to £4.70 an hour, which goes up from £4.52 in this current financial year. So maximising what we can passport through is the main agenda of the day, really. And then the final recommendation is, as always, that we come back and confirm the final year, subject to the annual review next year. So I'll stop speaking and ask if you've got any comments or questions.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Sean.
Yeah, just to confirm, and I speak on behalf of Claire Hennebury, who's had to leave, but just to confirm what you've said, Lindsay, in terms of being processed through Early Forum yesterday and kind of and comprehensively supported. So in terms of, I'm not sure if there's anybody else who's eligible to vote on this, but certainly my approval on those recommendations.
Great, thank you,
Sean. Yeah, I just checking for recommendation C with regards to the TPPG. I'm assuming that that decision would still need to come through Schools Forum, no matter what the report said. Okay, thank you. Yeah. On that case, my understanding is, I think, does everybody vote on this because this is a Schools Forum decision? Yeah. And so if I can, I'm now going to suggest that if we can have a show of hands again, just to say that we support the recommendations that Lindsay has put forward. Can you raise your hand now if you agree with the recommendations regarding the early years DSG, please? Sorry, early years rate review, I should say. You don't get a DSG. Yeah. Okay, that is nine people agreeing. Thank you very much. If you could put your hands down. Thanks, Mike. If you could put your hand down. Okay, and if I could just ask, is there anybody who disagrees with the recommendation? Okay, that is 0 people recommending, so that has been agreed unanimously by Schools Forum. So we agree with the recommendations that you put forward. Lindsay, thank you for the detail in the report and the process that you've been through. I know it is appreciated, and early years colleagues have commented on the way that they've been consulted has been really appreciated. So thank you very much, Lindsay.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Helen has just suggested that she's conscious of time, and would it be useful for me to send my update so it can be included in the minutes? I'm going to suggest, Helen, that is probably better given the timescales that we have, as we still need to discuss the CSSB. At no time do we think that SEND is, we've always got time for SEND at the moment in Birmingham. So yeah, we would love to hear from you. Denise, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm a bit concerned by delaying it again. But
okay.
I will obviously go with the majority. I do get time constraints, but it is a shame not to address such an important issue that the authority are struggling with across the board.
Okay, I'm Helen, if you're okay to wait, and I know how valuable your time is at the moment, can we do the CSSB, and then can we agree if those people are available to go past the end of the meeting that we can discuss that, or do you have another meeting to go to?
Yeah, I have another 2 meetings to go to,
okay.
Chair. So, but I will put it in. I will put an update in. I will send an update in, and perhaps try and get here first at the next Skip Schools Forum. That might be the easiest thing to do.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you, Helen. No, I understand, and I am speaking to you tomorrow, Helen, aren't I? Just to discuss some issues around SEND. So if any members do have anything, if they can email me directly, if there's any direct queries that they'd like me to pick up with Helen, that would be great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Okay, Terry, I'm conscious of time. If we could move to the CSSB, Central Schools Block.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So members of the forum will have received this report last week, and it's regarding the Central Schools Block DSG budget. Now, to summarise, we did receive 8.245 million in 23-24 as part of the DSG settlement. So the funding for ongoing commitments within the CSSB allocation has been increased by 2.42%. And in order to fund the remaining historic commitments at the same level as in 22-23, it will need to utilise 1.125 million of that 8.245 million from ongoing commitments. So there are 2 options to consider.
Terry, I'm going to ask if you could share your screen.
Yes,
that'd be
sorry,
great. Yeah, I am conscious of time as well. I'm just, I think because we do need to vote on this, it's my understanding it may be that if we could, if everybody is in agreement that if we could sort of get through I think we've read the paper, so it may be that we move to the decision, if that's okay.
Yeah. So
unless
is there any?
Yeah, I think if there's anything specific that you need to pull out of the report, that would be great. But I think we may need to go to the options if that's okay.
Okay. So
we've got enough people to vote. Yep.
Can I just ask that everyone can see option 1 and 2 there?
Yeah.
Which is fun. Yeah. So option 1 is to fund copyright licenses in full at the amount notified by the DFE, and that's an increase of 15% when comparing to the 22-23 rate. That's 22-23. So this requires use of an amount of 0.1449 million from CSSB reserves to fund the 1.125 needed for historic commitments from ongoing responsibilities, and to but not to increase the ongoing commitments by 2.42%. Now, if we increase the ongoing commitments by 2.42%, other than copyright licenses, which we have to pay at the rate that's been given to us by the DFE, this will require 0.275 million from CSSB reserves. So the two options are to take 149,000 from reserves, or to take 275,000 from reserves. So my recommendation is we've got CSSB reserves of 1.714 million projected in 22-23. So it's the recommendation of the local authority to increase each element of the ongoing responsibilities by the 2.42% that's been provided by the SFA in the DSG allocation, thus reducing the projected carry forward DSG CSSB reserve balance to 1.439 million at the end of 23-24. And the reason for this recommendation is that the SFA do not expect local authorities to retain reserves on any of the 4 DSG blocks, and expects each year's allocation to be spent in full on their intended purpose. So, Chair, could I ask members of the forum to vote?
Yep, thank you. Claire, would you like to comment?
Yeah, if I can, just to help with the decision, really, as we've already mentioned previously at Schools Forum, we have committed to look at the historic commitments with a view to reducing them over time and ensuring that we haven't got that deficit. So unlike the earlier decision, there isn't that to contend with in terms of we have got a plan to look at the ongoing deficit within the block. So hopefully that helps with the decision making on this one. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Has that report been shared with us, Claire?
No, not yet. We've committed to look at that over the period to September, but obviously with in Lisa's absence, we're going to need to work with Kate on that now, but we will bring something back.
Thank you. Okay, are there any other questions regarding the Central Schools Services block? No, in that case, if we are in agreement with the recommendations, I'm going to ask that if we could put our hands up now. Okay, thank you. That is six members who have agreed with the recommendations, and if you could put your hands down, please, that would be great. And is there anybody who disagrees with the recommendations? You could put your hand up now. No, okay. In that case, we can report that Schools Forum agree unanimously that they support the recommendations regarding the Central School Services block as proposed in the paper. Thank you, Terry.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, there are some comments in the chat regarding the report from SEND not being shared, and Jill has requested that can they have a written submission for the next schools forum, and I will take that to Helen tomorrow when I speak with her. Okay, so if I go back to the schools forum agenda, apart from the issues regarding SEND, I believe that we have completed all of the agenda items, and that means that all of the aspects of the schools funding for the APT has been resolved. Is that correct, Terry? Or anybody report that? Thank you, Tim, for the round of applause. That's great. Yeah. Is there anything outstanding?
No, nothing outstanding, Chair.
No. Okay.
Item 10 from Julie. That was requested to be brought to this meeting, I believe.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Julie, are you able to feedback on that?
Yes, I am, Chair, if you're happy for me to speak now.
Yeah.
Okay. As this was a verbal update, I haven't forwarded anything formal, but I have prepared something to read out to you, and I'm quite happy to forward this to you after the meeting for you to share, so that if people haven't quite grasped what I've said, that they'll have it in writing. So the purpose of this update is to advise Schools Forum of the agreed Commission place numbers for special schools and resource spaces for the financial year 23-24. Each year, local authorities are required to agree the number of places they are commissioning at special schools and resource spaces, which in turn drives the amount of place funding each school or resource space will be allocated from the high needs block. Meetings were held during the autumn term with the head teacher of each school or resource space to discuss capacity, severity of pupil needs, and agree final commission place numbers. My understanding is the CENAR commissioning team meet with special schools, and the access to education team meet with the resource bases. The number of agreed commission places is limited by the existing physical capacity within Birmingham. And obviously the number of places agreed to date does not reflect the number of places that are actually required. It does include any expansion scheme that is currently in progress, and BCCBA will be working with both special schools and mainstream schools, primary and secondary, throughout 2023 to grow this provision as part of its sufficiency strategy. Changes to commission place numbers are reported to the ESFA via the change place notification for academies, and that's done in November 22. And for mainstream schools, the commission places, any changes to commission places are notified to the ESFA via the APT, which Terry has already talked to you about and the forum have already approved. I have a couple of appendices which actually show the school commissioned special school and resource-based commission places. In summary, special schools in September 2023 commissioning places of 520. That's 5,020, sorry, not 520, 5,020, sorry, I do apologise. That's up 85 from September 2022. And resource bases are 659 places. That's up 17 from September 2022. It should be noted that those places and the place numbers that I've just quoted does not currently include the proposed age range expansion at Hamilton Special School, which is currently ongoing. If that is approved, this will add an additional 24 commission places from September 23. As that any change would be too late for budget setting purposes, it's proposed that a budget equivalent to 7/12 place funding for Hamilton School is set aside within top-up funding allocation for 23-24, because they won't be able to receive it any other way. And that basically is what I wanted to update you on. I've had this all written down. It can be shared with you immediately following this meeting.
Thank you, Julie. That was my next question, and thank you for feeding that back and collating that information. That's really useful. Denise?
Just a very quick one. Thank you, Julie. Yes, it would be good to see that information. It would be also good if this was shared at special forum, because we haven't had those figures, so it would be good to get that report there as well. Thank you.
I don't attend that, Denise, but I'll ask Helen to get that forwarded to you.
Brilliant. Yeah, whoever could be there or share that, that'd be great. I know quite a few obviously are there from sort of the special needs world.
Thank you, Denise.
Thank you.
Okay. And if there is nobody else, thank you, Julie. That's appreciated. Thank you, Denise. I don't have any other business unless anybody else wishes to raise anything. Denise, I assume your hand is up. Thank you. Okay. In that case, apologies for overrunning in this meeting. I'm aware that some people have had to drop out. Thank you very much for your time and bearing with the sometimes complex voting process. It is appreciated, and yeah, pleased to say that we have managed to complete all of the business from today's forum, which means we can submit the APT. Thank you, everybody. And just to say, the next meeting is on Thursday, the 16th of March. Thank you.
Thank you, James.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, James.